All right, thank you all for your patience as we work through our tech issues. This is our alternative emergency response subcommittee. We have just one presentation today, trying to go through the list of the materials we were all looking to get information on, or the programs. Angela had a question about the Google Doc that I started. Angela, I am beyond not tech savvy. So I asked Nicola, who made the Google Doc, to help me make sure everyone has access. So we will get that done for you. And then Nicola, you said that the past recordings, you guys are trying to get them uploaded.
Yeah, we're, Indira, it recorded it, but we can't seem to get it to either me or someone else to hear it. We see everyone, but there's no volume.
Okay.
Or I can't access it. There's no volume for me. So
okay.
we're working, we're hoping and praying.
So Chris, we're not going to add you as a participant. I see your message, only because we're trying to keep the screen with just the people who are participating. But if you have a comment or something, just put in the chat, then I can add you. We're just trying to not have the meeting where there's 8,000 pictures on here.
Oh, I'm Fleming. If everyone can send me your email, I can give you access to the Google Drive.
Okay, I'll send you their emails. I have a list. Okay. Okay. All right. So we will go ahead and get started. I know it's maybe a little bit of a tense day for some folks if you are watching the ticker tape on CNN. So we have our victim advocates are going to be giving us a presentation or talking to us today in terms of what their work is at the city. Next week, we will have Amita Health and Evanston Fire Department to tell us about the work that they're doing. And then after that, we will have Youth and Young Adult Division. And then I think that kind of wraps up all the information we were looking. Oh no, and then after that, our last thing will be information on kind of the 3 main alternative police models that are up and running now. And then we can kind of reconvene in terms of if we will have more information we want to gather, if we're ready to kind of start throwing some ideas at the wall. Just to give you guys an update of where we are. So Indira, will you start us off, or how would you? Indira Perkins is on the line. She is well, Indira, introduce yourself, and then that will.
Sure. So I am Indira Perkins. I am the Human Services Manager with the Health and Human Services Department. One of my responsibilities includes managing our victim advocates who are housed out of the Evanston Police Department. And so I have invited Kelly Nelson, who is one of our human service advocates, to speak on all of the services that they offer. So I'll let Kelly introduce herself and go from there.
You're muted, Kelly.
Sorry about that. Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see everyone. So I'm Kelly Nelson. I'm one of the advocates, human service or victim service advocates with the city of Evanston. I've been around for almost 7 years now. Time surely does fly. So what I do is, and what our department does, it's a 40-year-old department. We primarily follow up with crime victims, people who are victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, any sort of violent crime. But we also follow up on cases where there isn't necessarily crime, but people are reaching out to the police department. And in most cases, those are people who usually have some sort of mental health issue, whether it's themselves, or their family members are calling on their behalf. We usually follow a case from the initial report all the way through the closing of the case, whether it's closed because it was not charged, or whether the case goes to court and years down the line or several months down the line, the case closes in court. So throughout that process, we engage victims to let them know what's happening with their court cases. We often go to court in lieu of victims, because when something's going on for several months, they're not expected to go to court every single time. So that's where we come in, and we keep them abreast of what's going on. We often provide 24-hour, 7-day-a-week crisis call services. So there's one of us on call every day of the year in case there is something that happens after hours. We also provide education to the community on domestic violence, suicide, sexual assault, mental health services, that kind of thing. So that's pretty much the bulk of what we do every day. And most of our clients come from the police reports that are made daily.
Kelly, can you go into just how those calls come into you? I mean, you said you're on call 24 hours, but are you all responding to the scene of the crime? Are you doing just follow up after the crime or after the incident?
So typically, so it depends on what it is. So let's say it's a sexual assault, a death investigation, homicide, or just a natural death. We will usually get called to respond to the scene. We'll come out, we'll leave our homes and respond to whether it's someone's residence, to a hospital, and provide services from there. When it's after the fact and it's not necessarily an emergency, we will follow up on those reports usually the day after the crime occurs and follow up and offer services, whether it's counseling services or getting people connected into the court system, letting them know what's happening. Like if there's an arrest, we let the victims know that the offender was charged and that they're in court, and we explain that process to them too. So that's usually how we get cases, is through police reports, direct police reports.
Anyone can jump in with questions here, but I kind of filled it out based on what we had talked about before. And then, so when you said you get police reports, are you getting called from the dispatchers? Are you getting called from an agency? How do the calls get to you?
Well, so typically if it's a crisis call, we'll get a call from Indira, our supervisor. So a supervisor at the police station who's usually on scene will then call her and say that we need an advocate to come out for this case, or whatever the case is. If it's not that, then we are responding to the police reports that we are emailed twice a day.
So even if it's a emergency in the middle of the night, the call first goes to Indira and then to you?
Correct.
Wow.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's so I'm on call basically 24 hours.
She is.
Ike is my backup, but typically I'm pretty good about hearing the phone because I'm a light sleeper. But under normal circumstances during the day, we have two advocates. So there's Kelly and Ariel. During the day, if they were housed in the police station or working at the police stations, those calls would come directly to them.
Mm-hmm.
It's only after hours that I receive the call first.
Okay. Okay. Wow.
And what is the typical response time?
Typically, it's about an hour response time. Now, if we're leaving from the station, because we can be called for anything. We could be at the station during the day and we get called in and we're already in Evanston, so we just respond from there. But if it's something after hours, we usually get an hour response time.
I also want to add that the officers are very good with calling us right away when they get to the scene of something and they kind of have an idea that an advocate is going to be needed. They'll call me right away, or they'll call me and say, hey, can you have an advocate headed here or on standby? Because I think in a couple hours, we're going to need an advocate. Sometimes the homicides may take a couple of hours before an advocate is needed, but the officers are very good about giving us a very good head start.
Mm-hmm.
And are you all ever responding to calls of people who are having some kind of mental health crisis?
Typically not. We do not on scene, like calling us to a scene of a mental health crisis, but after the fact, we see those reports and we do follow up on those. We try to connect with the person who's in need of mental health services, or if their families call and we call them and try to provide some sort of support and help them kind of like, I've given out the mental health court number more than I'd like, but a lot of people are seeking services to try to get people help for mental health treatment. So we don't typically call for someone in mental health crisis, no, but we do follow up on those reports to answer the question.
So how often would you say there is a mental health issue to, where they would like some follow-up support?
Ooh, we get, I would say on average, we get probably about 15 to 20 reports a week of some sort of mental health crises. And that could be someone's calling the police because they're their therapists and they're making statements that are of concern and they want the police to go check on the person. Or a family member is at home and the person's behaving erratically and tearing up the house and they want the police to come to see if the police can talk the person into coming or going to a hospital. There's that kind of, those are the typical types of reports that we get.
And then what organizations do you connect the people with? I mean,
Well, so there's go ahead, sorry.
It would depend, but yeah.
Yeah, so there's the hard part with that. Typically, we can refer people to Presence, St. Francis, but more often than not, unfortunately, we're rarely ever able to get in touch with the people who are having the mental health crises. Either their numbers are bad or they never call you back. So unfortunately, we don't make a lot of referrals to directly to those people, but when we do, it's usually to some sort of counseling agency, some sort of crisis hotline that they can call in lieu of the police if it's not a situation they're a threat to themselves or anyone else, but if they just need to talk to somebody, we try to give them a crisis line number.
Right.
Maureen, you had a question?
I do, and first, Kelly, I wanted to say thank you. I'm with Peer Services, and you guys helped us out a couple years ago, and we had a really tough situation. So I just wanted to thank you for all your support during that time. And so I also, it really helped a lot. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you.
I also had the opportunity to hear, I think it was Indira present at the Health and Human Services Committee. Now it's been a couple months, and it was really helpful to get kind of a comprehensive understanding of, the main priority in victim services and how you guys work, and also that there are less of you than there used to be, right? Because I didn't know that, right? So that is helpful. So one of the things that we think about at Peer is like, how do we, people come to us when they or someone in their lives is telling them, you got to deal with your substance use problem. But there are an awful lot of people in the community for whom, substance use is part of what's going on,
Right.
but it's not really manifest or kind of like when you were describing about the challenges of actually getting to the people who are having the trouble with their mental health situations. I think we deal with that a lot too. And I feel like the best of all possible worlds would be that the crisis solution we come up with helps to draw people into care more, like whether that is mental health treatment or substance use treatment, because just putting a Band-Aid on it just means they keep cycling back through the crisis, right? So I wonder what in your experience you've seen work that helps kind of push people a little further, or what thoughts might you have about like how we could help family members and the concerned parties be more effective with their person, that they're worried about.
So are you saying in terms of getting people into treatment with substance abuse problems, is like, how can we?
Yeah, but not just substance use, because I think mental health problems are very prevalent too.
They go hand in hand.
Yeah, and I think that the challenge, like I'm sure all of us as receiving organizations have challenges on our end, like where we make it more difficult. But this sort of people who kind of bounce from crisis to crisis without ever getting past that point, I'm always very concerned about them, and I'm sure they come to the attention of the police and you guys often.
So, it's really kind of hard to say, like how exactly to get people into services, because, and we run into this challenge a lot because we get calls from, people in different crises, whether it's a young lady in an abusive relationship, someone who's mentally ill and they're not taking medication, but they're not to the point where they're a threat to anyone else or others. We basically just try to tell people that to try to continue to provide as much support as they can to the person. However, we often try to educate people that there's a fine line between helping and enabling. And I tell people all the time, like parents who have adult children who are in some sort of level of crises, whether they're not taking their medication or they have some sort of substance abuse problem and they're still living in their home, I say use your support, your financial support as leverage. Like if you want to live here, you need to engage in counseling services, or you need to start getting some sort of mental health treatment, some sort of substance abuse treatment. So we try to help parents parent in a way where they can try to get the results that they want through incentives as far as, you know, their support. It's not always easy, or we're not always successful in doing that, but we run into the same issues as everyone else is as far as trying to, we can't make someone take services.
Right.
And they often have, you know, mentally ill people often have so many rights that is almost to their detriment. Where you have to be, the threshold for getting hospitalized and staying in a hospital is so high that it's almost not even worth, in some instances, going to the hospital, because a lot of parents tell me they went last night and they're out today.
Right.
So that's kind of how we try to approach it and try to support the family members of people who are have children with mental health crises.
Yeah. Yeah, you hear that a lot from parents who are involved with NAMI, you know, who have gone through the courses, and they have more tools, right, to try to help their family member. But it is, I mean, there is this sort of desire for the police to solve the problem, but the police can't solve the problem, right? Because that's not where the problem lives. And yeah, it is, yeah. Good. Well, thank you for your perspective. I don't have anything more to ask or add right now, but I think this is the, you know, figuring out how we help the community as a whole feel more capable, whether it's the business community or families in the community. Like, that seems to be one of the capacity building things we can work on, regardless of what happens with 911 response. So I appreciate your perspective.
No problem. Thank you for asking the question.
Sure.
And Indira, maybe you can kind of walk us through this. So how do you, I know you said some of the supervisors send the calls over, or you'll get the referral. How do you decide, even just by looking at the police calls, which calls you send victim advocates to when it's, you know, the next day? And then do victim advocates provide any kind of long-term therapy, or is it all just kind of short-term referral?
So our advocates follow the case for the life of the case. So from open to close, they're there to provide support and advocacy. Kelly and Ariel are on on-call rotations. So it's unfortunate, but I believe for all of the homicides this year, Ariel's been the person on call. There's been times where some calls have come in and I know that one of them has been swamped. And so I'll call the other advocate, just someone that can go out there with a clearer head, doesn't have the weight of everything else on them. So that's typically how I decide which advocate to send. Now, when the officers call, it's usually a situation that does need an advocate. It's very rare that they're calling us and there's not an advocate needed. The officers are very good at assessing the situation and deciding that they need someone out there. But they do follow the case for the life of the case. Some of their cases they've been following for years.
Yeah. I know, Alderman Fleming, you did ask whether or not we provide therapy. And no, just to answer the question, we don't provide therapy, only because with the nature of the job, we're not equipped to carry a caseload for therapy. Therapy is designed, or we call it armchair counseling. It's designed to be long-term, weekly type sessions, and we're more of a crisis-focused bureau. We do counseling and supportive counsel in the moment, and when we follow up on phone calls, but in terms of scheduling appointments to come in for a counseling session, the Bureau isn't, unfortunately with two of us on call, it just is not, it's not practical. We did have a youth services advocate years ago. She was on the call out rotation, and I remember she called and asked me if I could take a call out for her because she was in the middle of a counseling session. And it's not always, it's not practical to have us doing therapy. So for that, we refer out to, for services for that.
And do you all work with youth?
Not typically. That was typically something youth services dealt with. Anything and get involved with involving parents struggling with children and parental issues and behavioral issues. That was something typically for youth services.
So we had a youth advocate, that was Heather Perkins. She's no longer with the city. So that position is now vacant. It should be posted to the city website soon. We're going to be hiring for it. But that person, the youth family advocate, is responsible for working with all of the youth families that we come into contact with.
But Indira, will they respond like the victim advocates? Will they respond on a 24-hour, or how do they get their clients?
They get their clients directly from the police reports. They also get their referrals directly from the Juvenile Detective Bureau from the police. But that, from my understanding, that role has never been on call. At least since it's been under Health and Human Services, it has not been on call.
So how long has that position been vacant?
It's been vacant for since October 22nd. So not long, but long enough when you're short.
Right. Okay. Right.
And we are asking for a third human service advocate
Right.
to assist with the work that Kelly and Ariel do. They went from a team of, I believe, 5 or 6 to now 2. So there is a need for additional bodies
Right.
to help.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, I think that a third position is in the budget for 2021 budget.
Yes.
And so another question I have then, so where do you see gaps, right? We want to make a program that's complementary, but not, the same. And we want to make sure that as much as we can, right, these people that we kind of design that we're going to bring on potentially have a clear line of work, the scope of work, but they can also work with other, agencies and other people within the city. But then we'll be interested to know, like, what are the gaps that you see, whether there are gaps in your department, aside from just staffing gaps, but gaps.
Right. So the biggest thing that one of the biggest things that people call us about is housing, affordable housing. That's huge, especially people in domestic violence situations. Since this pandemic, people haven't had an easy time getting into shelters. And a lot of people just simply don't want to go to shelters. And sometimes that's not always a practical solution for people, even in a dangerous situation. So like if you have a child, or especially a boy that's like 13 or 14, a shelter's not going to take him. So housing is an issue. We get a lot of people wanting information on jobs, like where they can go to find employment. But our biggest thing is housing and mental health services, and just being able to access those a little bit easier. And a lot of times people call wanting free services, which is difficult. Even though the referrals we make, a lot of them are sliding scale, they're not free. So that's another area that is of great need, is affordable counseling and housing services for people.
And do you feel like it makes a difference? And maybe this is obvious, but the time, your response time. So I know when you said you're, overnight and you have to drive in, it's a little bit longer. But we were talking about how to kind of position these staff for success, right? So
Sure.
if they're working in conjunction with police and getting calls out to service, do you find that people are even more receptive, or you're able to help more if you're there faster than the 1 hour?
I mean, it depends on what it's for. Like, for instance, If it's a natural death, it doesn't make a huge difference. If it's a homicide, not a big difference. Sex assault, because those call outs are the longest. Homicides, you can be called for 8 hours, depending upon, where things are in the investigation, where the person is, whether or not they have actually died. I remember when my first call out for a homicide, we were literally standing in the ER waiting for the young man to expire. Sex assaults take hours because you're sitting in a ER waiting for a sane trained nurse to come and do the kit that's needed. So not necessarily, we haven't usually missed a lot because we are an hour away. They know when they're calling us after hours, you're likely to get someone either sleeping or coming from home, or so typically I haven't missed a lot in 7 years with a call out. I think maybe one case we were trying to make notification, and that was only because the girlfriend of the deceased kept calling, and they wanted to notify his mother first that he was deceased before telling her, just to follow the proper protocol. So, but other than that, typically not.
And speaking of that point, Evangeline Seamark is usually on the call. She couldn't make it today from work, but I know she has a very specific experience with the police. Has been very, I think she came to Human Services once, very open just about what she wishes from the mother of victim side would have gone differently with the death notification. So where we're at in the death notification process. Like, whose responsibility, right? In a perfect world, whose responsibility is that?
To make the actual notification?
Yeah.
I mean, it's typically us, the advocates. That's why they wait for us. We do it in a way that's, I think, a little bit more sensitive than police do. I don't think the police go out of their way to be insensitive. I just think it's just the nature of their job. They're not trained in the warm fuzzies. That's kind of why they have us. But we typically go with the police to where the next of kin is, if it's local, or even if it's in Chicago, we'll go there. And I've gone to suburbs, and we'll make the notification together. I'll make the actual notification, and they can provide the details about like how they came to find the person deceased, like who called the police and that kind of thing. And then I'll do the follow-up as far as how the family's doing, making sure they know what the next steps are, whether it's the medical examiner's office or calling funeral homes. I typically make sure that they are followed up with in terms of that. Or if it's a homicide, letting them know what's happening with the case as far as that is concerned too.
Any more questions from the committee?
Well, I guess I hadn't considered that the Victim Advocates Program, that mental health issues were such a big part of the kinds of people that you need to try to help. So that I'm going to have to digest that a little bit, because certainly mental health issues are certainly one of the things that we've been thinking is going to be a big focus of this alternative response program. So trying to figure out how to have, as Alderman Fleming mentions, have a program that's complementary with what you all are already doing.
Yeah. So can I ask, so for this alternatives to 911, is this mainly focused on, is there a particular population like the mentally ill that you're focused on, or is it just kind of people that we're just trying to encourage to utilize other city services before calling the police? If someone could kind of enlighten me as to what is the actual target population.
Well, I think what we're trying to do is figure out which 911 calls don't really require a uniform police response.
Okay.
And so to try to have it be more directly a human services kind of response.
Okay.
So that would be different from the situations you're involved in, because you are working with an individual with a mental health issue because the police have already tried to work with the person and they need more help. So I think we're looking for the times when having this alternative response team go directly, respond directly to the 911 call.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a hot topic right now. I know presidential candidates are talking about. I know Joe Biden is, and Lori Lightfoot are trying to utilize social workers more in those types of roles.
Mhm.
I think everyone is well intentioned with that, but it sounds like a good idea in theory. It's just putting it into practice, especially in a situation where you just don't know, because mentally ill people, maybe they're a threat to themselves, maybe not. It's really hard to gauge your situation. I guess it's one of those things where you really wouldn't know until someone's out on scene and able to kind of speak to the people and see what's really going on as to whether or not it's safe to have someone that's not a policeman respond versus someone that is. So
Right. I think we need good training for the 911 dispatcher to be able to ask the kinds of questions to get that
right,
information. So that's
right.
a big part of the program. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Oh, go ahead, Maureen.
So what stuck out for me as I was digesting our conversation from last week was, the multiple calls in the week that the 911 dispatch folks had shared with us, like how many calls there were just for vagrancy, like which turned out to be somebody sleeping in a stairwell or a lobby of an apartment building, like lots of very, very disruptive, like I've had that in apartment buildings I've lived in, it's really hard. And at the same time, you want the person to go somewhere that's going to be more productive for them. And so I was thinking about that, and like those, the difference between that kind of call, which I don't know if it's less likely to be dangerous, versus like what Kelly and Indira are dealing with, where, I mean, the police have maybe been called. And so Kelly, help me understand if I'm thinking about it the right way. You guys, so like an alternative situation might be like a person who's having a mental health crisis is actually like tearing up their house, right? Right. So the police are going to be called in a situation like that, probably. And then you guys would get that call, but you probably wouldn't get called to deal with a vagrancy situation. Is that the right way it's happening now?
Yeah, no, we wouldn't be called for a vagrancy type situation. Like for instance, like even this person tearing up the house, we wouldn't necessarily be called for that, but we would follow up on that. And we call that person who called the police and say, hey, do you feel safe? What sort of services do you think we can refer you to so we can help get your son or your daughter, some treatment? What do you think the problem is? What have you tried in the past? We kind of try to assess the situation to make sure we're making the right referrals for people. But the toughest thing with mental health is all of it's voluntary, and that's the unfortunate thing. And I hate to say it, but there have been times where you almost hope that the mentally ill person will get arrested simply so they can be forced to go to a hospital or be forced somehow through the courts to be mandated in a treatment, because I worked in a hospital as a social worker in graduate school, and we would go in and we would ask someone, hey, do you know what day it is? What's your name? Who's the president? Do you want to hurt yourself? Do you want to hurt anybody else? And if they answer those questions with no, even though they were brought in for psych issues, if at that particular time they're alert to person, place, and time, there's nothing you can do and they'll release them. So that's really the biggest issue with mental health. I feel like it needs to start from a federal type of mandate that we need to change the system. And I appreciate this type of group and this type of discourse that we're having about this, so that we can at least try to at least get the thoughts rolling in terms of how we can help people aside from, calling the police. Yeah.
Kristen, did you have something you were going to say earlier? Oh,
Sort of answered it, but I wanted to just make sure I have my head around it correctly. So most of the time when you all get calls, it's kind of after a situation has already occurred and you're coming in to generally provide services and advocacy for the victim or the caller, right? So in a mental health situation and a parent is calling on potentially, a son or a daughter who is having mental health issues, your follow-up the next day is generally with that parent. Is that correct? And making sure that they feel safe and whatnot. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I'll call both.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll call anybody on the police report who was involved to kind of get their take on the situation. I want to first find out from the caller what was happening, that, talk to me and more about what's been happening, the history, because oftentimes these aren't the first times these people are experiencing a mental health crisis, and it's probably something that's ongoing. Someone's cycling, someone's off their meds. So yeah, I'll try to engage everyone that I can
Okay.
in order to try to get people connected to the right services and figure out what's going on.
Okay. And then one other question, in your experience in responding to some scenes, I know, and not to others, I think part of what we're trying to think through is that if a trained mental health professional responds to the actual crisis and is able to intervene at the time and potentially de-escalate, could there be a better chance of one, it not getting to a point, right, that they need hospitalization, but they're able to connect potentially with that person, de-escalate, and get into more of, long-term services and whatnot. And so I think we're trying to figure out a way to respond to crises while they're happening, to potentially try to de-escalate those things. And I think that would play into a separate thing from what you all are doing, but I think parallel in regards to who's involved, whereas you all
Sure.
come in. Yeah, so that's the only thing that I was.
Yeah, so I think, I was just on a meeting last week with one of the judges and all the other advocates who are in the North Shore area. And we're all, the whole mental health thing is a big thing for everybody. Even the judge in courtroom 106, Stephanie Saltoris at District 2, she's like, I need to know where we can go to send people for mental health services, because even after they're arrested, the courts recognize this is a mental health issue. Like you're having domestic violence issues because there's an underlying mental health issue. And so one of the advocates in Niles, I think what they're trying to do is work with, and it sounds like it's in its infancy stages as well. It's not take the police completely out of the equation, but have a social worker work in conjunction with the police. Like whether it's having someone zoom in, and a social worker zoom in, from an officer's cell phone, because they're at a scene with someone who's obviously having some mental health issues, to see if they're able to talk to the person as well. So it's not so much just in lieu of the police, but it's kind of, they're trying to see how social workers can work with the police as it's happening versus take them completely out from the outset. Because I think if people are calling 911, there's some degree of crisis that they can't manage, and these are usually family members and people that are closest to these people. So they're calling for something. Whether or not calling the police in the long run is the best type of situation, because we call people and say, let's talk about some other things you can do before the need to call the police. But most of the cases that we're encountering, that we're following up on, are what they're calling involuntary committals, where the person's mentally ill and they're not willing to go to the hospital, but they end up going. So they're just trying to get that loved one to a hospital to get them somewhere where they can get services. So that's typically what we see. It's not necessarily just a person who's maybe not at a psychotic state, but they're ideally, what it sounds like you all are trying to do is work with someone who's more in maybe she's a little down, family's concerned, she won't go to counseling, but she might need to talk to somebody. But someone that we're dealing with is usually there's some sort of crisis that needs immediate response. So I think that's why they're calling the police. So
Yeah. Part of that immediate response too could be people are calling the police because that's what they have.
Yes,
Right? I
that's
mean,
all they know.
that's all we have. I mean,
Mhm.
even if they know, hey, I have a great counselor at, Kristen's a great counselor. We've worked with her at Moran Center.
Mhm.
I'm not necessarily going to call Kristen at 2 a.m, right? I mean, we've set up the society so that 911 is all you have.
Right,
So I think
right.
we're trying to think through. Patty, you had something earlier.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, first of all, I wanted to say to Indira and to Kelly, and I know Ariel's not on the phone, but just thank you, first of all, being on call all the time and knowing that it's only a few of you. That really is, that's a difficult thing, and it really, I think, probably hinders you guys having the personal lives that you want to have. So I'm glad, I hope that you'll be able to be hiring some. But Kelly, I did want to echo kind of what you said. I work for an agency with folks that have adults with serious and chronic mental illness. And oftentimes we follow this housing first model where they do not have to have a clinician. So if we have somebody who's having a mental health crisis, we will, and we have folks who are on call, 24 hours. So let's say a neighbor calls or something like that, because of the statistics for folks who interact with the police who have mental health issues or mental illness, and we know that often those types of situations don't go well, and which is why I'm very happy to hopefully come with some sort of solution where a social worker or a counselor or something might be the first point of intervention. But you are exactly right that it is often the police that have to take them to the hospital, and that's the only thing that's going to work. And one kind of a bigger systemic issue is I think we have different mental health agencies in Evanston doing different things, but we're not all talking to each other. So that is something else that I know I serve on a panel with Maureen where we're trying to do some education and advocacy around that. But I think that's also something, so that would give you guys the tools and more information on who to refer people to when then, like you said, the next day you're trying to connect folks with mental health issues. So I might have an offline kind of email conversation because I know you mentioned employment and some other stuff, so I'll connect with you offline about that. But mainly I just wanted to say thank you for continuing to do a great job and taking call like that, because I know that is not easy. So, and appreciate your presentation today.
Oh, well, thank you very much. And thank you everyone for at least having this so we can start this discussion and hopefully come up with a solution. At least, if nothing else, Patty, we're connecting and maybe something will come of that. And, Kristen, who knows, and Maureen, where all this could eventually lead to. So thank you.
Angela, did you have something earlier? You were waving your hand earlier.
Oh, yeah. I was just kind of wondering about, you were saying that, the advocate will follow something for the life of the case, which I understand in terms of like a murder investigation. But what about when it's something like domestic violence or, a sexual assault or something? How is it determined, like the life of the case, where versus do you continue to check in on someone over a period of time, or do you just refer them to someone else who will continue to check in on them?
So life of the case just simply means for as long as the case is going. Like once it closes, we always tell people you're free to reach out to me whenever, if you, even after this case, you have my phone number. I'll always be your advocate. So you can always call. So we do typically continue to make connections as long as the case is going. Like once it closes in court, that's typically it. But here's the thing, domestic violence, as many of you know, it cycles. And we often see people over and over again. And you build a rapport that way, from seeing each other and engaging each other like, oh yeah, it's Kelly. Hey, I'm calling. I saw that report. But yeah, we follow the case for as long as it's going on, but we always tell people you can always call us if you need us. I've had people call me, complete strangers, who say, you helped my friend, and so she gave me your phone number. So yeah, it's not that it just ends, our services ends when your case ends.
Sure. But, and if you had helped someone once, if that person is calling again, do they get assigned to you again, or is it just whoever's available?
I mean, I guess it is who's available, but we typically like to keep the same victim with the same advocate. And the reason for that is, unfortunately, sometimes your victim may end up getting arrested. And if we both had them as a victim and there's only two advocates, it can create a conflict of interest if I'm now the advocate for your abuser. So that's why I like to keep my clients, and Ariel will keep hers.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank
Mhm. Mhm.
Any more questions or comments?
Just one for
Go ahead,
me,
Melinda.
unless somebody else has one.
No, go ahead.
So Kelly, how often, do you wind up seeing kind of the same people over and over again versus, it's lots of new people all the time?
More often than not, most of our cases are repeats. I've had case files like this on, couples, and not everything is a knockdown, bloody, drag out fight. Sometimes it's anything from a domestic battery where someone's physically battered, or it can be they were arguing and someone called the police, and so it's a domestic disturbance call. But either way, we follow up. But quite often we do see some of the same people over and over again.
Yeah. I know that there's a gentleman who is been seen many times in Evanston in the last 8 months because he overdosed in public. And so, it's probably a third of the calls for the police for acute intoxication and overdose are this one person. And it made me think like that might be true more often than we think. And there's some, anyway, I just want to think about that a little bit. So thank you. That's really helpful.
No problem.
All right, Kelly, well, I don't think we have any more questions.
Okay.
Dear, put your email in there, so you might be receiving some emails. And then I'm
Awesome.
sure we'll chat with you and Indira as we get closer to trying to put something together.
Okay.
And I think it will be something that complements, excuse me, the work you're doing, and it just is more services for the citizens of Evanston, whether it's mental health or, Angela belongs to our business community, and she talked about sometimes just finding people sleep in her vestibule. Excuse me. And so that might just be something that falls within James and someone who's homeless or a runaway or whatever else.
Okay.
Thank you all. Thank you for joining us. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. See you next time.
Okay, very helpful to hear from you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
All right. Take care.
Thanks.
And so for the group, like I said, we have those 3 more weeks of speakers lined up, which I'm happy to, if you have some questions beforehand, or if you want me to have them ask, if you want me to have them prepared to ask specific questions, I really just ask them to come and tell us what they do, how they, interact in the community and with the police, kind of give us some feedback on where there might be some gaps in service, whether it's the service they're delivering or, what they're hearing in the community. And then for us to just have a discussion. So I haven't really asked for them to bring any hard data aside from the 911 presentation. So if there's something specific from any group, just let me know so they can be prepared to answer that. For our quote unquote calendar, I have us scheduled out the week of Thanksgiving. I assume people, even if not traveling, we're just looking forward to some type of break to this very, very, very long year. So I didn't schedule us there. So I think that the last speaker is the week of the first week of December, and then we can kind of review and figure out where we want to go from there. I also will be speaking to our city manager just to get an idea of, we have a ways to go. We can present back to Human Services maybe with a draft of what we're thinking, but then just to get an idea of kind of the human resources part. Not that we're going to put that together, but as you know, we employ lots of different unions and all that. So just want to be mindful before we spend a lot of time kind of shaping something up and going down a road, if it's going to need to be flushed out with unions and kind of how all that stuff works, if it's that's something we need to consider at all. But, didn't want us to come up with this really, really great, tremendously valuable plan and then be told that it's a union job. And so it's got to go in negotiations and, so maybe we can plan on, I don't know what our total calendar is, but I would assume We will have human services in December. So I would guess maybe we will have something to go back to human services in January as a draft. Human services usually only meets the first Monday of the month. So if we want to have something to go back to January, maybe with the draft of human services or just an update, and then I imagine they'll have a lot of input and bring it back to us, and then we'll go back to them maybe in February with something more fleshed out, and kind of go from there is what I'm thinking in a perfect world. But we'll see what happens tomorrow when we wake up in the morning. How we're all feeling. That being said, I'm not a therapist. I went to the school for my master's in social work for 1 year and decided it was not the job for me. But in my limited experience as a therapist, I am thinking of you all. Hope everyone is well as we, are on the precipice of, I'm not sure what we're on the precipice of, but hopefully everyone's taking care of themselves. And as we have our COVID numbers unfortunately rising as well, that we're taking care of our health as well in that way. I know you guys are all doing good work and are all very exhausted, I would imagine. So just know that I am mindful of that. And so Nicola is recording our meetings. We've had not we, because I don't do tech, but there's an issue trying to get the minutes up there. I know, Eleanor, you had a resident who was wanting to look at the past meetings. So if you could just let me know, we're working on getting the recording up online.
Sure. Yeah.
I'm also happy if you guys have people who are interested. There is a link for the public to join. I'm also happy to, talk to people kind of one-on-one about where we are, but you're also very, educated to do that yourselves.
Okay. Sounds like a good plan.
Well, and
Thank
thank you for navigating us through this, because it's definitely a field completely under development, but this is the moment. And so it's just very exciting to be part of it. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. So we'll get the Google Drive so that everyone has access. And then we will meet again next Tuesday.
Okay, great.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.
Yeah, take care. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.